Before we start, this podcast contains graphic content such as brief mentions of bodily harm and sexual assault in a fictional setting. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, I'm Natalie. I'm a double major in creative writing and professional technical writing. Something about me is I'm a reader at heart. I devour books like it's a human necessity. There's something almost magical about losing yourself in the pages of a good book for hours on end. I have read well over 100 books in my life, spanning different genres and topics, but there's something that's been in the back of my mind for a while now. Because there's so many novels that contain graphic content and sensitive topics, where do we draw the line in creative writing? Or is there no line at all since it's purely fiction? Today, we have two guests from different literature backgrounds who discuss their opinions on this topic. Let's have our first guest introduce himself.
I'm Justin Green. I teach in the English department here at Virginia Tech, and I teach literature and cinema, and my work kind of deals with identity and authorship and masculinity in media products, particularly film and literature.
Thank you. And so our first question to discuss today is, since there's a lot of novels that deal with graphic content and stuff, like Lolita and American Psycho, do you think pushing these boundaries in writing elevate the story? Like, do you think it makes it more interesting?
I think it needs to serve a purpose. Many of the writers that I like to read and the ones that I like to teach, they know that purpose, and they know that this triggering subject matter is there to represent some level of humanity. And they know that it has both a relevance to the plot and the overall narrative of the story being told in their artwork, but they know that it also is something that is based in, unfortunately, reality of a given time period, a given people.
Do you think it's worth it to read all of these books at the cost of reading the gore and violence and stuff? Like, when does it become, like, not worth it?
I think that's an individual reader type of determination. I, as a person, don't typically shy away from this sort of stuff. It's very few and far between of things that are going to kind of just push me away from a story. Readers and viewers have to assess themselves. And again, it's based upon individual experiences, aesthetic experiences, age. Sometimes the older we get, the less we are to stomach some of these things because we know the horrificness of them in reality, whether it be through news or, other types of mediated consumption or even, unfortunately, life experiences, right? These things become less part of our entertainment, and unfortunately, these are entertaining pieces. But then too, if we think about it in a classroom setting, it goes back to the purpose of the course. These things are meant to be looked at as not only art pieces, but sociocultural, sociopolitical critiques of their time, of current time. It comes down to, again, purpose. What are they being used for? And if it's classroom, what are we trying to achieve by looking at this? So when we read American Psycho, what is Bret Easton Ellis trying to achieve by giving us this, ultimately sadistic, depraved glimpse of what an individual man does and can be and sets himself up as, right? And what is he trying to say through that? But then again, too, I know that I have students in my classes that have experiences that I don't wish they had, and I try to kind of give them a forewarning of this through either a trigger warning or a kind of reading guide. They can choose to navigate through a troubling piece like this based upon, again, their own individual experiences, because again, it comes back to how the individual engages with the text.
And then for a final part of our discussion, are there any authors that come to mind that shouldn't have access to creative freedom in writing?
I don't want to single out authors. I think, again, it goes back to what is their intended goal by creating this artistic piece. And if that piece is just to traumatize and shock, the intentions behind it are questionable. If it is art for art's sake, Salvador Dali's and Louis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou. And within the first, few frames of the film, they're slicing open an eyeball. They're surrealist artists, right? Like, it's a film that they know is serving a purpose of art, right? And it doesn't matter. But then again, you can kind of take this in another route and think about someone like Toni Morrison in The Bluest Eye, who's using incestual rape and the ultimate product of that is a pregnancy for a young girl to tell generational trauma, to tell racial trauma, to tell socioeconomic trauma. So, I think, in those kinds of examples, right, like, you have two that are using it for purposes that, in my opinion, would be just. Morrison and Dali and Buñuel are using it in a just way. They know they're making art. They know they're making art that is socio-political.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So here we have Sophia Terazawa.
Hi, my name is Sophia Terazawa. I am a poet and performance artist, currently a visiting assistant professor at Virginia Tech.
Our first question for today is it the poet's responsibility to fully explain sensitive themes?
I think I can answer this question one of two different ways. One way I could answer as a teacher, and the other way I could answer as an artist. As a teacher, I absolutely believe in a responsibility and caring for the nature of the classroom, the students' comfort level with the poetry, specifically its content. I'm a big advocate of content warnings in the classroom as a teacher. However, within my own art, a lot of my poetry deals with elements of trauma, genocide, mental illness. And I find that I don't necessarily have a responsibility to my artist, but first and foremost, I have a responsibility to myself. Mm-hmm. How do I care for myself as an artist? And how do I put truth onto the page?
And for our second question, how can a poet use language to push boundaries without relying on graphic imagery?
I think that a poet must first of all understand why they are writing what they write, and then they might need to think about how they are writing what they write. Sometimes I find that there's a disconnect between the two, especially when we are dealing with words of immense violence. I think it is important to write about difficult topics like violence, like trauma, but the how is where the art comes in. I find it to be most generative, at least in my personal practice as an artist, to practice the balance between naming something exactly as it is without metaphor, without simile, and then finding a way to make music out of surviving that.
Should there be limitations on creative freedom in writing?
That's a question on who's putting the limitations. I feel like as artists, we already do such a good job at censoring ourselves and limiting ourselves. It's more distressing, I find, when the limitations are coming from external forces. So an institution, whether that is a university setting or it's a publisher, the limitations are already there in other ways, in explicit or implicit ways. I think the role of the artist is to be able to squint and see through the reasons why those limitations exist and why, conversely, do we limit our own freedom of speech. I think we have the responsibility of not just breaking those limits, but really seeing where those limits are coming from. What is the political role of a limit? What is a repressive role of a limit?
This was a lot to unpack. Today, we explored the boundaries of graphic content and creative writing. Dr. Justin Green mentions the importance of purpose. If a brutal scene serves a story and reflects reality, it can be a powerful tool, but individuals should be mindful of selecting their content that deals with graphic imagery. Sophia Terazawa added the artist's perspective and highlighted the importance of navigating difficult topics, but also a reminder of why and for what we are writing for and respecting the reader's comfort level. Ultimately, there seems to be no single answer. Authors have the freedom to push boundaries, but how they do it, and if it's in a just way, matters. Whether it's a content warning or crafting powerful imagery without relying on solely graphic details, there are ways to tell impactful stories while being mindful of the reader's experience. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to our guests today, who provided a thought-provoking discussion.